Hey you guys, so I know it's been a while since I gave you a video, and for that I do sincerely apologize. However, I think this video will more than make up for my prolonged absence. So in this video, I want to cover this article by Atlanta Black Star and in the same sense give my analysis on this behavior that proves the detrimental attempts at having these new age slaves realize that there is an issue with their way of thinking. So let's just jump right into this one. So the article starts off by saying, College Football Hall of Famer Herschel Walker, 58, spoke against a bill that purportedly would pave the way for reparations for descendants of slaves during a February 17th hearing. Walker, a supporter of former President Donald Trump, that should tell you guys who we're working with here, said during a House Judiciary Committee meeting Wednesday that atonement wouldn't help black people. House Democrats have reintroduced a bill that would establish a federal commission tasked with studying the impacts of slavery, bring redress to the economic, educational, and health disparities that divide the nation along racial lines. The government must account for its ongoing role in perpetuating, supporting, and upholding white supremacy, said Representative Cori Bush during the February 17th hearing regarding Bill H.R. 40. Walker, one of several dignitaries who spoke at the hearing, said reparations are a moot point in 2021 and that race relations are improving. My religion teaches togetherness. Reparations teaches separation, he said in his testimony. Slavery ended over 130 years ago. How can a father ask his son to do prison for a crime he committed? The bill, sponsored by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, has been reintroduced for 30 years but has been unsuccessful. It was first introduced by the late Representative John Conyers in the late 1980s. A hearing was last held for the bill in 2019. President Joe Biden has expressed his support for the study of reparations for descendants of slaves. According to H.R. 40's text, the commission created by the bill, which has 162 co-sponsors, would consider a national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery, its subsequent de jure de facto racial and economic discrimination against African Americans, and the impact of those forces on living African Americans to make recommendations to the Congress on appropriate remedies and for other purposes. I want to pause here for a moment and say right off that the religion he's most likely referring to in his testimony is probably Christianity, because that religion is full of delusion and it's very nonsensical. For those of you that don't know, I'm very spiritual myself, which should not be confused with religion. A religion to me says you need to do this, this, and this in order to achieve some favorable outcome in the afterlife, and that's unnatural to me. Also, Christianity is birthed in white supremacy's image, and because of the heavy amount of indoctrination during black people's enslavement on the plantation, this was beaten into our ancestors. They stripped them of their strong willpower and broke them down, not just physically, but also psychologically. But you guys already know this already. So this is a classic example of a slave not realizing they are a slave, and he truly sees himself as someone who's probably developed this delusional sense of freedom. And I feel like it's appropriate to bring up something that is very much needed, and this will help shed some light on my own analysis. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with Dr. Joy DeGruy, but she has a book which I heavily recommend you all check out. The name of the book is Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which talks about the trauma that black people face today that has been passed on to them from several generations of their ancestors. And I believe that a lot of us have this unique trauma. The rage we feel when one of our own is taken from us with no consequences, the overall inequities we face when maneuvering throughout the society in general can all be attributed to this. The systemic issues we face as a result of this falls within this same classification also. And I briefly want to read something to you guys, because what it is it's a general synopsis of what Dr. DeGruy describes it as. So when you look at some of these points, the first one here that she talks about is vacant esteem, which is insufficient development along with feelings of hopelessness, depression, and a general self-destructive outlook. The second one is marked propensity for anger and violence, which is extreme feelings of suspicion, perceived negative motivations of others, and violence against self, property, and others. The third one is racist socialization and internalized racism, which is learned helplessness, literacy deprivation, distorted self-concept, antipathy or aversion for the following: the members of one's own identified cultural ethnic group, the mores and customs associated one's own identified cultural ethnic heritage, and the physical characteristics of one's own identified cultural ethnic group. Now, as you guys can see, some of the components of this syndrome would even apply to Herschel Walker, specifically the part about internalized racism and how he expresses aversion for his own people. Also, one thing you guys have to understand is that Herschel Walker is a Republican, so that should have revealed right away that something is amiss about him. But I've expressed in my videos that Republicans freely express racialized sentiments and ideologies, and a black person literally has to ignore all of that to fiend for that sense of desperate acceptance. This means he must have a strong dislike for himself because the faction that he wishes to be a member of requires it. But something tells me he would loathe himself without them even requiring it regardless. So, for me, reparations are needed for American descendants of slavery because it's our ancestors' compensation for their construction of this country. And by not demanding it, would not only leave us in a compromising predicament, but we would also dishonor our ancestors. We are still building this country through their corporate infrastructure, aka the evolved slave plantation. The fact that Herschel Walker opposes this does not surprise me. His pathology resembles other slaves that are in a deep state of slumber. The Candace Owens, the Jesse Lee Pattersons, the Kanye West, Stacey Dash, all of those who have vehemently attempted to disassociate themselves from their black identity. And the quote by Marcus Garvey rings true, especially in this situation. He said that I have no desire to take all black people back to Africa. There are blacks who are no good here and will likewise be no good there. And what he was alluding to were the ones who were counterproductive to our progression, the ones who are treacherous and deceptive, that will only destroy the foundation of our cause, even before we have a chance to act. And honestly, I don't think we're going to get reparations in the traditional sense. It's something that black Americans are going to have to demand, possibly in a form of civil disobedience. Other groups and communities of people were given compensation in some form, whether it was monetary or through land acquisition. And what sickens me about this society is that it seems to think that us being in the presence of the larger society is somehow equivalent to reparations, and that's good enough. And again, that's why I say in order for this to be taken more seriously, it will require a collective demand for reimbursement. Another thing we should stop doing is developing this defeatist rhetoric and mindset by saying these things like, oh, well, they're never going to give it to us, or something along the lines of just giving up on it. We need to stop with that crap because our ancestors wouldn't want us to give up on them. They were murdered and brutally mistreated just for us to exist in the climate of today. And I just hate to think how they would perceive us if we just put forth little to no effort because this is something that we are owed. But I'll finish reading more through this article and actually just finish it out because there isn't much left. But it says, during the hearing, Walker questioned how blackness would be measured if the bill were passed and inquired about the economics of repayments to millions of Americans. University of Connecticut professor Thomas Kramer, who also studied race and reparations for 15 years, estimates that the cost of slavery and loss of wealth through slavery amounts to $14.5 trillion without adjusting for inflation. He believes the recent stimulus checks could provide a blueprint for how reparations could be distributed. The experience of trillions of dollars being sent to people's homes through the tax system might be an example of how this could be done fairly easy, Kramer said. Representative Jackson seemed optimistic about the legislation process. I think if people begin to associate this legislation with what happened to the descendants of enslaved Africans as a human rights violation, the sordid past that violated the human rights of all of us who are descendants of enslaved Africans, I think that we can find common ground to pass this legislation, she told Black Press of America. You know, it's funny because I've talked to some people about this before. If the government wanted to, they could easily disperse reparations via the same way they disperse stimulus checks. It isn't difficult because all they would need to do is, through a process of automation and banking information, figure out which bank accounts belong to a black person and send payments this way. And for the remainder of those who don't have a bank account, contact the IRS about how to receive the check for reparations. The verification process would be extremely simple. All black people would have to do is make sure to provide their social security card and their birth certificate. And there you go, disbursement of reparations properly paid. And I think personally the amount should be increased for those who have dependents, because children and also by association, those who are unable to work fall under the same category. To wrap this commentary up, I want to finally give my analysis of the situation with not just Herschel Walker, and it's fairly simple. Black people have to move accordingly. We should not allow those with white supremacist level rhetoric and indoctrination to speak on behalf of our community. I believe for the most part, we're all cognizant of those, but then you still have the incorrigibles whose minds have already fallen to the sunken place and are out of reach for any redeeming qualities. Focusing on how we can improve our community and outright disregarding those that serve as a hindrance or an inhibitor to our progress will help our condition slowly but surely convalesce. And the reason I wanted to bring up Dr. Joy to you guys was because she does an excellent job with her assessment of how post traumatic slave syndrome affects Black people and will more than likely impact our future generation. The only shot I say we have at reversing this is to enlighten our children and nurture them with the proper tools and resources to be weary of what challenges they'll face in this world. It also helps to teach them the importance of self-love and valuing who they are as their minds develop and respond to the stimuli in their environment. But let me know your thoughts on this. Do you think by now Black people are already aware of the Herschel Walker types and ignore them? Or do you think these types can potentially pose a threat to a young Black mind that's coming into its prime? Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And thank you so much for your continued support. I'll see you in the next one.